The way that you hold your paddle on each shot is arguably the most important aspect to your technique. The problem is, most players I see are doing at least one thing wrong when it comes to their grips. So in this video, I'm gonna cover the 3 most common mistakes that I see players making. I advise you to watch this whole video because it's very important that you learn to play with the right grips. It's nearly impossible to reverse these bad habits in the future if you learn this wrong, so pay close attention. So the first mistake, and definitely the biggest mistake that players make when it comes to their grips, is they use the wrong grips on certain shots. So depending on what shot you're hitting, whether it's volleys, whether it's a forehand, you need to adjust your grip to get the best possible results and to get to the highest possible level in the long run. So to start, before we go over the shot specifically, we need to cover the 4 main grips in pickleball. So when it comes to gripping the paddle, there's 2 main things that we need to consider. The first are the different bevels on the grip. So every grip comes with 8 sides. So it's an octagon shape. And as you can see here, we have this big one in the center, angled one on the side, and then we have this side bevel that's perpendicular with this center notch. The other thing we need to consider is where our index knuckle meets our hand. So as you can see, I have an X to show this point. This is usually where we're gonna reference as to where our hand is lining up with these different bevels. So these lines are important too. I'll cover these later, but for these grips, all we need to be considering is this reference point and these bevels. So the first grip we're gonna cover is the Eastern grip, and that's where this reference point lines up with this center notch. So as you can see, I'm holding it right in the center. I'll talk about how we use this grip later. The next grip is called the continental grip. So that's where this reference point is in line with the angled notch right on the left. This is the most important grip in pickleball, but unfortunately not many players use it very well. The next grip is called a Western grip. This is far less important, but you should still know it. And it's where the reference point lines up with the other angled notch to the right side, if you're a righty, of the main notch. So I'm lined up here. The next grip, also not quite as important as the Eastern or continental, is where I'm on the side like this. Sometimes players like to use this on their one-handed backhand. I'm lined up with the side notch that's perpendicular to the center. You don't need to use this one, as I'll talk about later, but you should still know it. It's where I'm lined up with the side like this. So the 4 main grips are our Eastern, our continental, our Western, and this one-handed backhand grip right here. All right, so now guys, I'm gonna take you through each shot that you would hit in a point, and I'm gonna go over what grip I think you should be using when you hit the shot. So just keep in mind, not every player always has the right grip. Even some of the best players use what would be considered the wrong grip on certain shots. But if you go through 90% of pro players and high-level players, these are going to be the grips that they have. If you disagree with any of them, you can let me know in the comments, but these are sort of the generally accepted right grips for each shot. So the first shot that the most people have the wrong grip on is the backhand. And this is the shot where if you have the wrong grip, it actually affects you the worst. So that's why we're starting off with this shot. On backhands, there's a lot of different types of backhands, but I see a lot of people doing something like this on their backhand. So this would be called our Western grip. You don't want to be coming with a Western grip on the backhand. A good backhand should be hit with the back portion of your hand. So depending on what type of backhand you're hitting, usually you're hitting this with a continental grip. So if I'm hitting a backhand drop, definitely want to have a continental grip. Any sort of backhand slice, I probably want a continental grip. On topspin backhands, I also can use a continental grip. Sometimes on topspin backhands, people like to use that one-handed backhand grip that I showed you. This is sort of a debatable thing. I actually use a continental grip when I hit a topspin backhand, but it's more of a preference thing on the topspin. What you need to know though is that when you're hitting a backhand, 95% of the time, whether it's a backhand volley, backhand dink, backhand drop, you want to have that continental grip, and that's how you get your technique to look right. So if you're doing something like this, which I see a lot of players doing at the courts, it's pretty much impossible to get your backhand to a high level. So I'm never gonna be able to hit topspin. I'm never gonna have that much control if I'm hitting my backhand like this. Use the continental grip on most of your backhands. It'll look something like this. It's where you hit it with the back of your hand, and that's the right technique, and that's how you get your backhand to the highest level in the long run. If you've never done this, it might be tricky at first, I'm not gonna lie, but as you practice it more and more, you'll get better at it, and you'll have a way higher ceiling in terms of how good your backhand can get. And guys, a really important thing to consider on your backhand, which I'm gonna mention later, is that your thumb needs to be wrapped around the back of the grip. As I mentioned, I'll go over this more later, but you need to keep this in mind if you want to be successful with your backhand. So the next shots where I see players having the wrong grip are their volleys and their dinks. So pretty much everything at the kitchen. And what I recommend most players do, or most players learn up here, is the continental grip. And the reason for that is as I'm dinking or as I'm hitting volleys, with the continental grip, I don't need to change my grip. So I can dink and I can volley without having to change my hand positioning, which makes it a lot easier for me to react to harder, faster shots. However, most players use the continental grip, most pros, but you're starting to see some pros experiment with the Eastern grip too. And I think that just makes it easier on the forehand. A lot of players use two hands on their backhand. The general right grip though up here is the continental. So if you're confused as to what you should use, I recommend learning the continental and learning to go from side to side. On your forehand with a continental, you have to lay your wrist back to do it effectively. So you can't just go side to side without moving your wrist. Your backhand will be more natural. You have to lay that forehand grip back. So my wrist lays back so I can hit the ball forward. With this continental grip though up here, it makes it easier to react. Once you get natural with it, things will start to feel really easy from up here and your reflexes will get faster. The next time players mess up their grip, this might be one of the most common, is on their smashes or put away shots. So generally, if you're coming from a tennis background, the best way to hit a smash is with a continental grip, because the continental grip lets you pronate. So pronation is this, and you can get a lot of power by doing this. So if you have an Eastern grip, you can't really pronate as well. So a continental grip lets you hit really hard on your smashes without much of a swing at all. But I see a lot of good players using the Eastern grip. This is a way more intuitive grip to start on when you're doing a smash. So if you want the most possible power, you should learn the continental grip and you should learn pronation. But an Eastern grip is fine on a smash, especially if you're reaching into the court. So if you're reaching into the court on your smash, you might want to use the Eastern grip because it allows you to reach a little bit farther. With a continental, it's kind of hard to reach far and aim my paddle forward. So I would try to learn the continental if you can on your smash, but Eastern should be fine. What you don't want to do is Western. So you shouldn't be hitting smashes with this Western grip because you really can't pronate at all here. And it might be natural in the beginning, but you're not going to be able to hit hard enough in the long run to end points against good players. So maybe try the continental. If you can't do it, try the Eastern. Just don't use a Western and try to develop one of those two. In the long run, you want to be able to do it with the continental and the Eastern. The last time that you want to be thinking about using the continental grip is on what I call emergency shots. So whenever your opponents are hitting really hard at you and you're not going to hit a drive, you probably want the continental grip. So if I'm really stretched and I have to hit a drop, or my opponent has like an overhead and I'm responding with a shot like this, you want to have the continental grip because, like I said, when you're out the kitchen, the continental grip is the best grip to wait in when you need to react to something quick. So whenever I'm waiting for a ball, usually I start in the continental grip. And if I need to change to an Eastern, which I'm going to go over in a little, I can. But usually I'm waiting in the continental grip so I can react to a hard shot if I need to. So when it comes to the forehand and the serve, so these shots right here, this is where you want to probably be using an Eastern grip. So when I first got into pickleball, everyone was using a continental grip on their forehand and serve. But if you want to get the most possible topspin, with new paddle technology like this, you can get a lot of spin. So you kind of want to angle your paddle down more. And the best way to do that is with an Eastern grip. Some players, this is not for everybody, some players use a Western grip, which looks like this. You can really get a lot of spin on it. But unless you're coming from a tennis background, I don't recommend using a Western grip. I come from a tennis background and I personally don't like the Western. It's just too downward facing. I can get enough topspin with my Eastern grip. So on your forehand and serve, I recommend using the Eastern grip. Definitely, probably don't use the continental. You can try Western, but Eastern is probably going to be best for 90% of players on the forehand and the serve. So the last thing you need to keep in mind when it comes to these grips is that you need to have a good mechanism to change between them during a point. So the first way to do that is what I'm doing right now, where you just spin your paddle around with one hand. This can be a little hard for some players though. So this is what I would try first. If you need to switch from continental to Eastern, I just do it by switching it with one hand. So I kind of like spin the grip around like this with my fingers. I played tennis my whole life though, so it comes naturally. If you can't do this, what you can do is you can add your left hand on when you're in ready position. So when I'm waiting for the ball, I can just use my left hand to get myself in the right grip quickly. You just need to have a mechanism for doing this when you're in the point. So you shouldn't be doing it at random because you don't want to be ending up in some weird grip when you're about to hit the ball that's going to make you hit it a different way every time. You want to spin the paddle so that it ends up in the same spot every single time so that you get good and comfortable using the grip that you use on that shot. Now I'm gonna cover what these lines are for. So the next mistake players make is that they're holding the paddle wrong. So maybe they're holding it like this, maybe they're holding it like this. I'm gonna go in depth as to what you shouldn't be doing and what you should avoid. Before I get into that though, I wanted to quickly mention that our Paddle the Sweet Spot Pro is currently on sale, and we also have an additional sale for YouTube. So if you use code YouTube, you get $20 off this paddle, which pretty much makes it the cheapest paddle on the market with this technology. So it has T700 carbon fiber. It's pretty much as good as a lot of paddles over $200. So the Carbon 1X is a paddle that has pretty much the exact same technology as this. It's about $200, or could be over $200. And this, if you use the code right now, is only $80. So the deal you're getting on this is absolutely ridiculous. And has great bevels, so that when you're changing your grip, you can really feel it in your hand. A lot of paddles have weird grips that kind of make it hard to tell where you're at. This paddle has a great grip to where you can really understand what your hand is doing on your paddle. So if you're trying to learn the grip, it makes it a lot easier. And with this surface material, T700 carbon fiber, you get way more spin on your serves and on your forehands and anything you're doing topspin with. So if you want a paddle upgrade, but you don't want to break the bank, head to our site and use code YouTube to get the Sweet Spot Pro. So in terms of holding the paddle wrong, there's a few mistakes players make when doing this. So if you look at these lines, the red line represents holding the paddle with the hammer grip. So right now the red line is in line with the paddle grip. And as you can see, I'm sort of gripping it like a hammer. So I don't have my fingers spread out. I don't have my hand extended up. My hand is probably tight. What you want to do is you want to have this looser grip where this angled line is in line with the paddle. So as you can see, when I do this, my fingers sort of ride up the paddle. My index finger is usually a little bit higher than the others. And when I do this, it just gives me a better grip on the paddle. So when I'm holding it like this, I have more leverage towards the top because my hand is more spread out. You don't really ever want to be holding the paddle with the hammer grip, especially when you have one hand on the paddle. You want to be using this spread out grip. There's not really a name for it, but it's a spread out grip where your fingers extend up. This lets you be looser without having to squeeze the paddle so tight so that it doesn't twist in your hand. With this grip, you can be loose. The paddle won't twist as much in your hand because you have more surface area and you can hold the grip nice and loose. The other thing you don't really want to do is have your finger up here like this. So a lot of players do this. It's kind of a controversial thing. There's like a few pros that actually do it. So you can kind of get away with it. But with this grip, you can't really change your grip very easily. So like, if I want to have a continental grip, it's kind of weird to do that with my fingers on the paddle. So generally I recommend holding your paddle at the bottom, especially when you're at the back of the court. I put my pinky at the very bottom of the butt cap. It's okay though if you want to go up here and do something more like this. Just try to avoid gripping so high on the paddle. If you want to do this, you should just get a paddle that has a shorter grip. If you really just want to be super close to it, there's no point to have this extra grip down here. Most players though are better off holding it towards the bottom with this spread out grip. This is going to give you the most versatility on all of your shots around the court. I personally keep my grip at the bottom for every shot, and most pros do the same thing, most high-level players. Some players will choke up a little bit on their volleys. You can try that, but probably best off keeping it down here with the same angled hand and then just switching between the grips like this. So you can get comfortable with this grip. This is the best way to start off, and the most players do this. So the third mistake that players make when it comes to their grip is they hold their paddle with the wrong tension at the wrong times. So sometimes you want to be holding your paddle tight, and sometimes you want to be holding it loose, depending on the shot. So the simplistic version of explaining this is that when you're hitting a slow ball hard, you want a loose grip, and when you're hitting a fast ball hard, you want a tight grip. When you're hitting a ball soft, usually you want a looser grip. So how does this look like on actual shots? Well, if I'm hitting volleys and they're coming at me fast, I want to have a tight grip because it makes my sweet spot a little bit bigger when I grip the paddle tight. And when I hold the paddle tight, it turns my paddle into more of a wall to where I can use my opponent's power against them. So if I'm holding my paddle loose when my opponents are hitting hard, I might mishit the ball or I might mistime it. The paddle kind of makes a different noise when I hold it loose and they hit the ball hard. However, if my opponents are hitting slow balls to me and I'm hitting volleys, this is where I kind of want to use my roll volleys and flick up the back of the ball. So I have a pretty loose grip here, and I can use that loose grip to get paddle momentum and generate power. So that's an example of where you'd want to use a stiffer grip, a more firm grip, probably like a 7 out of 10 when my opponents are hitting hard at me and I'm hitting volleys. And then on a slower one, you probably want to use about a 3 out of 10 so that you can get that flick momentum. So it's not just you use a different tension on your different shots, it's actually a situational thing based on your opponent's power. Another time where you can see this difference is on a return. If my opponent's hitting really hard serves, I kind of want to have a stiffer grip and just block the ball more so that if I miss hit it a little bit, it doesn't come off my paddle with a super bad trajectory. However, if I'm hitting a really hard drive from the back of the court, I want to be loose so that I can accelerate through the ball and hit it hard. So they're both ground strokes, but because it's a different situation, I use a different grip tension to get a different result. So remember, if your opponent's hitting the ball harder at you, usually you have a stiffer grip, and when they're hitting it soft and you're trying to generate power, usually you have a looser grip. Make sure to comment if you think there's any exceptions to that. And if you like this video, guys, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. And if you guys want to watch another one of our more recent videos, click one of these.